Hello, I'm Kurt Lidke, Executive Director of Klamath Film, and you just watched The Monument, a visually stunning look at the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument in our Southern Shorts category for the Klamath Independent Film Festival. Joining us now is the director of this fascinating short film, Crystal Nichols. Crystal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kurt.
So, was this a one-person production, or did you have a crew to help you out? Because some of the aerial shots on this are really particularly impressive. So, it looks more like it should almost be like an IMAX film. So, was that done with a drone or helicopter or what?
Yeah, so it was predominantly a one-person film. I recorded almost all of the footage, but I was really fortunate to have my good friend Dustin Saigo help me out with the drone cinematography, and he does obviously an incredible job. And I fell in love with drone drone footage. I had never had much experience with it before, but yeah, I it elevated the film in my mind and gave such an amazing perspective that I was going for. But most of the other footage was shot by me. Yeah.
Okay, great. Uh, your background isn't necessarily in filmmaking, but it is related to the topic of the film. So, how did
Yeah,
you get involved in filmmaking?
that's a great question. So you're right. My background is mostly in photography. So I've been a photographer for about 10-ish years. And then a scientist is my actual profession. So studying biology, predominantly aquatic habitats. But I took an interest in filmmaking as I directed my career a little bit more towards environmental education. And I just recognized the power in connection that film holds. And so my thought was photography is basically moving film. So I'm going to jump into this endeavor and see if I can tell a cool story. And so that really drew me into it, and I totally fallen in love with film, and I will never go back.
So, what is your affiliation with the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument? You said that you're a scientist and photographer by trade. So, are you directly connected to Cascade-Siskiyou?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working for the Department of Fish and Wildlife here a few years ago, and while I didn't do much work in the monument, it was kind of my playground, and I explored it and got to know it really well, and just became amazed at the diversity that existed there, and seeing things that I knew could only be found there in the monument. It was so special. And I began talking to people in the community about it and saying, yeah, I was hiking up in the monument, and they're like, the monument, is that a building or some type of statue somewhere? And I said, well, I get why you could get that impression, but it's this amazing swath of land that has immense diversity. And so that just kind of drew me to the realization that people didn't know much about it. And it's a truly incredible place on our planet. And it's found right in the backyard of so many cities here.
So, your film touches a little bit on the history of it, how it was founded, and whatnot. But what do you think people should know about the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument?
Yeah, that was a question that kept coming up as I was writing narration and thinking about the focus of the film. And for me, we all get inspired by films like Planet Earth, and they take us to faraway places that are really magical. But here in the U.S., we have places that are so exceptional and so special, and especially here in Oregon, we're so fortunate that it exists right here. Not everyone has that in their proximity, such an untouched or just preserved area um, that showcases some really incredible, beautiful things. And so I hope my one takeaway, or my hope that people take away, is that there is so much beauty in a diversity of life, and hopefully that idea and that kind of concept can motivate people to speak up if there's ever an opportunity to protect wild places.
So, how much time did you spend in the monument filming to compile enough footage for the finished film?
More time than I ever care to admit. Um, it in total it was about 2 years, but I was pursuing my master's degree at the time, and so most of my weeks were filled with schoolwork and my master's degree, and then every weekend for about those 2 years and every day in the summer, um, and on every break, I was in the monument filming, and even sometimes right before class and right after class, I was just heading right out there just to get that one sunset shot that I'd been looking at forever.
So it sounds like there was a lot of footage that went into this short film. So how much footage did you end up shooting versus how much was used?
Yeah, I calculated that, and it was the most hilarious thing. So I have about 10 hours of footage, and the film is about 17 minutes, and so I did the percentage, and I've forgotten it now in my head, but it's an immensely small percentage of the footage was actually used. And that was such a time-consuming process going through logging it all. But yeah, about 10 hours of footage in total. So yeah.
Your film is a really great showcase of the region. Was your goal educational or maybe driving tourism or both?
Yeah, I think it was hand in hand. For me, learning about the monument through the master's program and just in my own time and trying to conceptualize the distinct habitats that came in, I think part of it was educational. I did want people to see, like, wow, this is like a desert. I didn't know we really had a desert type habitat here in Southern Oregon. So I wanted my hope was that people could conceptualize and learn about the habitat a little bit and about this kind of convergence of these different mountains and regions. But I also just wanted the beauty to come through. I wanted people to be able to see it, and experience it, no matter where they were, which was cool. So I'm from the Midwest originally, and so to send this film back to my family and friends there, and they're going, "Oh my gosh, it's like I was there. It's like I was in Oregon." I was like, "That's pretty cool." So you can see this amazing place that I get to live in.
Uh, well, especially if you're from the Midwest too, because there's this concept out here called mountains that don't really exist in the plains. The idea
Yeah,
of what we would consider a small hill is epic
exactly.
terrain.
Yes,
So,
highest point of elevation in the whole Midwest. Oh,
so what do you hope that people get out of your film?
yeah, that is a great question, and that was hard for me to think about when I was creating it, because there are so many challenges and so many viewpoints surrounding the monument. The private versus political, or the private versus public land, and the shrinkage discussion that came up, and all of those. I didn't want it to necessarily be an activism film or like driving people to action. I think my hope was that it just instilled a sense of appreciation for what exists in our world, in our natural world, and that through that appreciation, people might recognize that they could feel connected to a place, even if they hadn't been there necessarily. Because I think that film has the power to do that. It has the power to bring something you haven't seen and have you feel connected to it. And so I think that was my goal, was just that sense of connection.
Your job and work related well to it, and I'm sure that helped. But
Yeah.
inevitably, any of us who have spent time in the field filming have run into some difficulties or challenges to try
Oh
to
yeah.
solve, and that gets compounded when you're out in the wilderness doing it. Anything unusual or funny or really memorable occurred during the course of production of the monument?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Absolutely. I as of starting as a photographer, I think my biggest battle was with the tripod, because it's just like it's such a cumbersome component of trying to stabilize film. So I always felt kind of silly just like running around with this tripod. It's just like so heavy, and I'm just like feeling sometimes like I'm gonna drop it. Um, and so I think that was a learning curve, and a kind of like getting used to having this hunky tripod around. But it was a challenge to be a almost solely independent filmmaker doing this in the wilderness, because everything that applies when you're hiking or camping applies when you're making a film, but it's that much harder because you're not focused on those things necessarily. And that became really apparent to me even my first day shooting. I was out in a pretty remote area. It was so hot, and I was like just shot after shot, and so I hadn't had anything to drink really, even though I had everything with me. I wasn't doing it, and so I'm just kind of hot, and it's the middle of the day, and I hear this just really loud sound come from jumped around in time to see the butt of a bear running up the hill. And I'm standing on the edge of this small canyon on the other side, so I'm going, I really have nowhere to go. And I think my my heart has never beat faster than in that moment. But I it was funny because I had a thought right after the initial fear of like, I wish I had shot that. I wish I had captured that bear running away. That would have been amazing. But yeah, it was kind of daunting to be filming alone and out in some pretty remote areas and just like at the whim of nature, totally. So
So you said you had about 9+ hours of footage that didn't make it, but
yeah,
inevitably, what got cut? Because we all have to let things that we like not end up in the finished product.
yeah. I remember I had a mentor a few years ago when that described kind of removing your some of your favorite parts as killing your darlings. And that became so apparent in the film because it's just like there were so many shots that I wanted to fit in there, but they didn't coincide with the narration I was envisioning. Um, and so it made it tough. Honestly, it was hard to cut the drone footage because I think I loved almost all of it. So I was wishing that I could put it all in there. And it was tough because my goal was to showcase as many different species on the screen as I could. And so it was hard to make those decisions to have to cut out some of the diversity because that's the whole point of the film is to show all these different species. Um, so I cut a lot of flower. I took a lot of flower footage that I ended up cutting, and just some general cloud and kind of time lapsey shots that I didn't really have the time to fit in. But that was the hardest part was killing your darlings, cutting out the wonderful things.
You have to try to be concise if you can, but your film comes across as a very Zen-like experience. It's not, I mean, it stands out well as a nature documentary, but it's not like the typical nature documentary. It's more just sort of an ambiance piece of just enjoy the background and enjoy the scenery.
Yeah.
Have you worked on similar projects in the past, or are you working on your next film now?
Yeah, so this was my very first film. I'd never made a film until this point, so I learned a ton, but I studied a lot of film. So I was watching and observing styles and specific shots and um, in so many other films, in so many other series that so I could kind of learn what I wanted from it. And the Zen component came from my desire to really focus on the wildlife. So I could have told a bunch of human stories and how intertwined we are in the monument and everything that it deals with, but I really just wanted it to be to take that kind of noise away and have it highlight the landscape that you were seeing and those intricacies and all of the species that were there. And so I think that's where the Zenness came from, which is awesome. I'm happy that it was Zen. And yes, I am working on my next project. It's much smaller, but it coincides with some work I've been doing with the Rogue River the Watershed Council. We are working on a project, and I'm creating a little film to highlight it. So it'll be much shorter, but hopefully just as potent and beautiful as the monument.
Terrific. Well, your film does show it off pretty well, but to you, what is it about Southern Oregon that makes it a great place to film?
I one of the things that people always say when they choose where they want to live is it has four seasons or it has a changing seasons, and I do recognize that, but I think I didn't expect to see such beauty in each season. We have the winter, which is pretty rainy, but the clouds settling into the valley during that time are amazing. And then just the scorching hot summers that are usually pretty clear, like hardly any clouds in the sky, but the just like that immense heat kind of driving the different the different climates and the different habitats that you see. And I think there's so it sounds kind of cliche, I guess, but there is so much diversity in the habitats. You can still find the water, you can still find mountains, but then there's also like juniper, deserty land, and um, And I think for me, that always kept me entertained as a filmmaker. There's always something new. It's like I'm in a bunch of different states filming, different habitats. So it's like a combination of all those different places.
It's definitely a contrast for me, and I agree with what you're saying. I spent about 12 years working in Hollywood, and LA does have its own seasons as well. There's
Yeah.
drought season, fire season,
And
earthquake season,
yeah,
and mudslide season. So
yeah, that's a little bit more intense than just some rainy and clouds in the winter. Oh man, that's intense. Yeah. Wow.
So, filmmaking in general, now that you've done one film, have you kind of caught the bug? Is this a direction that you want to go in and get more heavily involved in the future?
That's the question that like keeps me up at night when I'm trying to think about where I want to go next. Yes, I have. It really what I've been searching for as a photographer and a writer and a biologist is something that combines all of those components in a really powerful way. And I think I definitely found that in film, because the article after article of the power of storytelling, of that being a way that people not can not only learn, but it can be something much more powerful. And I think that it's an exceptional avenue for moving forward with environmental awareness and hopefully action ultimately. And so I definitely have caught the bug, as you said, for filmmaking. And I don't expect this to be my last film, even though at the end of it I swore maybe it would be. Yeah, I love everything about it. I really do.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Crystal. And in addition to being available online all weekend long through Eventive, people can catch the monument in person here at the Ross Raglan Theater in Klamath Falls on Sunday, September 20th at 12:45 p.m. for the 8th annual Klamath Independent Film Festival. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kurt.